One more article. See, this was back in like October. People started waking up. And in October, 130 Catholic scholars from colleges wrote a letter to all the bishops in the country. And they weren't happy about Common Core. And it made a big stink, and it was a good thing, because now everybody's not just saying, repeating like parrots that it's rigorous, and it's not an inch deep and a mile wide, or whatever the opposite of that is. In this letter, which was led by Gerard Bradley from Notre Dame, he argued that Common Core represents a major departure from the main objectives of Catholic education. And the main objective of Catholic education is to form a person to seek the good, the true, and the beautiful. So when you replace fictional texts that teach moral formation with informational texts, that's antithetical to that main purpose of Catholic education. And you don't have to be a Catholic to have a moral standard. I want these children to grow up and have a moral standard when they're making policy decisions that affect individual human beings. We're not just one big society that should be managed by Bill Gates and Rockefeller and Arne Duncan, all right? We're individuals, and children are individuals, and they all learn differently. One size doesn't fit all. And what one person thinks is a defect, 20 years from now could be a miracle. It's a personality quality that needs to be trained up. It's not, let's make all these kids learn the same thing at the same time. And the way they police it is the test, all right? So if you're a homeschooler or you're a Catholic school, understand they are realigning the ACT and the SAT to Common Core. So they police everything with a test. Everything's about test scores because test scores mean money. They mean school rankings, property values, teachers' salaries, potential scholarships. They figured out. They figured out how to control the system. Almost done. A couple more quotes from these 130 scholars. It's a recipe at best for drudgery, and at worst, plain incompetence. That's E. Solon. He is professor at Providence College in Rhode Island. And in the end of his article, he explains some of his experience. Changing Catholic education in response to meeting state expectations for public schools, Esalen argued, has not yielded positive results. He said it has put Catholic schools at the mercy of changing fads in education since the 1950s, the latest being Common Core. They should just get rid of it, he says. He points to his own experience as a professor. You're going to like this quote.
Okay.
He frequently has to reteach students how to write papers, and these are students who have been told that they spent an entire year in a class preparing for an AP test. We're talking about AP students. The type of student who's generally set apart in his class, it's not the Catholic school student, it's the homeschooler. Homeschoolers clean everybody else's clock. But they are not being taught with the AP test in mind, he said. Catholic educators need to go back to the roots. What is human education and what is Catholic education? We've got plenty of Catholic writers on the subject, and we need to go back to those.
Okay.
So that's the Catholic scene. I'm going to have a piece of information over on this information table, and it will have links to the letter. It will have addresses and phone numbers and email addresses for our Catholic diocese, if you choose to write them. And you don't have to be Catholic to write them either. Thank you.
Next we have Julie West. Julie has been interviewed on numerous television television and network radio shows about education and specifically Common Core. She's a licensed minister. She was the director of a classical homeschool for years with expertise in Latin and logic, which she tutors that also. She's still a prison chaplain. She's been doing that for several years, and is the president of Parents for Truth in Education. And I give you Julie West.
Well, I'm bad about walking around when I talk. Tell you what, I know we're running late, but if you guys can hang with me a little bit more, can we fire up that video? Do we have that ready to go? Because wherever I go, I tell people, don't believe me, research it. So we've got the video clips right here ready for you to go.
Do you want to say who these people are?
Okay. Predominantly, you're going to be hearing Arnie Duncan, what he says on Common Core, whether or not it is in fact a state-led thing, what are the origins, whose idea it was, and you see David Coleman, one of the originators of Common Core, about really what their goals are. So again, we've got Arnie Duncan, Obama's Secretary of Education. So there we go.
And so I think just being honest, being straightforward, continuing to tell the truth is very important.
Today we're having a discussion, as you know, about the Common Core Standards, which was an initiative of the Obama administration. Today we're having a discussion, as you know, about the Common Core Standards, which was an initiative of the Obama administration.
When I was involved in convincing governors and others around this country to adopt these standards, it was not Obama likes them. Do you think that would have gone well with the Republican Democrat? And they might wonder whether we had a legion of talented lobbyists or friends in the right places.
As you know, about the Common Core Standards, which was an initiative of the Obama administration.
Tom, who knows me well, knows how pathetic the beginnings of the Common Core Standard movement were. Think of a napkin. Think of a few people in a room with an idea.
One is the Common Core is just a bunch of words on paper. David Coleman, who is kind of the motivating architect behind this, sat me down for a couple hours when the first draft was released, and I think they're perfectly reasonable standards. I've never been a standards aficionado. I think a lot of people say the Common Core is great, who actually have no idea how do you distinguish good from bad standards. I don't know how you distinguish great from bad standards.
We're partnering with Dan Wagner's team from the campaign on the data side. For that, we're partnering with another side of the campaign, of the Obama campaign that is, with Jeremy on mobilizing, the field mobilization, right? So there's data and there's field mobilization. But we're also talking about communications. We're talking about advocacy and policy.
The Obama administration.
We met the other day on their invitation with the White House because they saw that we were beginning to take the lead on this issue and they saw an opportunity for this country to get something done.
I think it's important for us to tell the truth. We deal with, you guys know there's going to be devastating gun violence in this city, in this state, in this country. I'm going to keep talking about common sense gun control. Tea Party doesn't like it, we get pushed back on that. We got far too many kids in Chicago public schools being killed each year. And so I think I have a moral obligation. We need high standards, we need fewer guns on the streets, that's the right thing to do.
But we have agreement to the extent that it's a fuzzy definition that the minimally college-ready student is a student who's passed Algebra 2.
the set of Tea Party folks who think that, raising standards is somehow a bad thing or we shouldn't be encouraging that. I just come to this as a parent. Do we want more for our children or do we want less?
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM, it's not for international.
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges that, for example, UC Berkeley, even whether you're going to be an engineer or not, you better have pre-calculus to get a
But we have
decent
to
work.
think of our
Right?
engineering colleges,
And
scientific.
that's true. I think the third pathway goes a lot towards that, but your issue is really broader than that.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got that
I'm not
out.
just thinking of selective colleges. There's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get you, and that's the big subject.
But not to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
Okay, thank you.
And so I think just being honest, being straightforward, continuing to tell the truth is very important.
The only problem with those two forms of writing is as you grow up in this world, you realize people really don't give a shit about what you feel or what you think.
I'm sorry, I had the version with the music, and you can't hear that last statement with the music. So I do apologize for the profanity. First of all, let me get into this, based on who those people were. Now, we keep hearing over and over and over that Common Core is a state-led initiative, and I tell people, don't take my word for it. Research it for yourself. Every one of those people has been key in the Obama administration, and every one of them has been, not anymore, but initially, was all over the country saying, well, yes, this is the president's idea. Yes, here's how we developed it. Yes. So, are we going to believe the talking points, or are we going to believe the words that come out of their mouth? And we need to be clear on this as well. This is not about R's and D's, donkeys and rhinos. There are people on both sides of the aisle who are clearly wrong on this issue. And I'll say this, that today Common Core has come to represent more than just a set of standards. And technically, the way a lot of people discuss it, it has come to mean more than really Common Core itself, because it's sort of become this general, all-encompassing thing for socialized education, or the socialization of education, the federalization, the federal takeover, if you will. And so it's sort of come to include also next generation standards, K through 12, sexuality ed, C-SCO, wherever you are, when people are talking about, hey, big government is taking over our schools, it's, oh yeah, well that's Common Core. So people will go, well, Common Core doesn't cover that. Maybe, maybe not. In short, Common Core is a data-driven, top-down methodology for education that, ironically, has absolutely no data supporting that it works. Think about that. It is, in other words, the federal government's unconstitutional takeover of education that has never been studied, has never been tested, has never been evaluated in any way at all. And in fact, it's not surprising that those who were brought in to endorse it, the educators, once they saw it, they said, there is no way. There's absolutely no way, because there is no data that shows that any of this works. Now, there's a few important points to consider. First of all, as the video showed, they are not state standards. The National Governors Association is nothing more than a trade organization that, in fact, many governors do not belong to. No one voted for Common Core. No citizen, no legislator, no one in Washington. Now, they voted to receive Race to the Top funds, but was any group sat down and said, okay, it is your duty to vote yes or no, do you want these standards? It was bureaucrats and educrats and truthfully, political appointees that decided, yeah, this is what we're doing. We are taking 15,000 separate individual educational districts and shrinking them basically down to one. The other thing is they'll say they are voluntary. Well, let me ask you this. Everyone who has tried to tell me, oh, we've got to take the standards, we've got to take the standards. Why do we need to take the standards? Well, because if we don't take the standards, we don't get our money. Well, how voluntary is it if the federal government is saying, you know what, if you don't implement this, you don't get your money? And in fact, how voluntary is it if Arne Duncan is threatening to sue even California for failing to fully implement? So we need to just be honest about what it is. Now, proponents talk about we need standards, we need standards, we need standards, as if there have never been standards. Let's be clear on this. There have always been standards in education. Colonial America was the most literate society in world history. It had a literacy rate of 100% in the urban areas and a shameful 90% in rural communities. And when visitors came from Europe, they marveled that any milkmaid was capable of discussing constitutional issues or advanced theology, that they could reason, that they could think at a depth that most had never thought of. Now that began to change in 1852, which is one of the saddest years in American history as far as I'm concerned, because that was the day that the government of Massachusetts first involved itself in education. Now, and let me back up a minute. Jeffersonian students, just to get into high school, were required to know advanced mathematics. They were required to have a mastery of classical languages. They were expected to be masters of astronomy and agriculture. And their standards were set around a kitchen table, because mom and dad knew what they wanted for their kids, and if this tutor, if this school marm wasn't doing her job, then we'll get someone else. Let's keep in mind that their standard for literacy was far higher than ours today. It was a deep understanding of the King James Bible and the Constitution. Okay? So the standard was much higher, and the literacy rate was much higher. And on that, I'm going to step aside. I've talked to more than one parent in this county, and I won't call you out, a couple of you are here, but who basically discovered they've got A students in Williamson County schools who in certain ways are functionally illiterate because they were never taught to read cursive. So when they get a letter from their grandmother, can I point you out? Denise, wave out. Denise has an A student at Franklin High School in AP classes. She got a letter from a family member, and she's not capable of reading it because she was never taught to read cursive. Beyond that, she cannot read original copies of the Declaration, or, you know, the photocopies of the Declaration of Independence, of the Constitution, of the Mayflower Compact, of any of the original documents that are foundational to our government. Because somebody just decided a few years back, well, that's not really that important anymore. So we can marvel about test scores, but really, let's be honest about what's happening. Now, and on that, regardless of your educational level, I challenge any of you to pass an 8th grade graduation test from 100 years ago. Most PhDs can't do it today. And what we end up doing is we end up forcing minority and inner city kids to take remedial classes in college so that they'll be burdened with the debt for an education that they were supposed to get for free in a public school. Yes. And that is shameful. There's a best-selling series of books, what every 5th grader should know, what every 4th grader should know, what every 2nd grader should know. And all the moms and dads rush out and buy it and go, well, this is what every 5th grader should know, and so I need to know this. But nobody stops to go, you know what? These books were written by men from northeastern cities. Northeastern atheists, I mean outspoken atheists, what if they were written by women from Kansas or Omaha? What if? Because here's the thing. How much hubris does it take to say, I know everything and I have determined what everybody else needs to know in order to be educated? I mean, really, let's think about the vanity level there. And that's nothing new. About 150 years ago, again, prior to that, we had exceptional education, and it was set by parents and local communities. About 150 years ago, a British philosopher named Herbert Spencer decided he was smarter than everyone else, and he wrote a book entitled What Knowledge is of the Most Worth. And he wrote this huge dissertation, and what he eventually came down to was science. Arts didn't matter, language didn't matter, music didn't matter, literature didn't matter, even mathematics didn't matter unless it figured into science, because he was a great man of science. And because colonists tended to just assume that the Brits were somehow more enlightened than they were, they kind of fell in line and went along with it until, 1890, we'd gotten over that, and there was the NEA put together the Harvard Committee of 10. And these guys wrote what were to be the final standards and finally settled once and for all what everyone in America was to know. And by early 1900s, we had decided that those really weren't very good standards at all. So we had another committee come back, and they rolled out the cardinal principles of elementary and secondary education, and that was supposed to be the once and for all final standard of education. Since then, there's been a relatively never-ending stream of the once and for all final, we promise, honest to goodness, this is the last set of standards. Right on, Generation 2000, No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, and on you go. So obviously, this is not about high standards or objections to them. People aren't objecting to standards. They're objecting to common, and they're objecting to core. Now, here's something else to consider. For most of our nation's history, the standards were completely voluntary. They would put the standards out there for schools, for states to look at and go, here's where we think you ought to be. But what's happening now is, not only here's where we think you ought to be, but if you don't get on track with us, you don't get your money. And by the way, I have up here the data points that they were talking about. There's 400 of them, and it's page after page after page. But those in favor of Common Core say, well, we have to do this still, because if we don't do this, we have to send the money back. Well, if we have to send the money back, it is an illegal federal mandate, and it's null and void. And if they're not mandatory, then we can do what we want and keep the money anyway. Everyone wants standards. The thing is, everyone wants to be the guy who gets to pick them. And that's just the truth. So why are we, again, talking about shrinking down 15,000 different communities and their different adjustments and shrinking it down to one? Because obviously, don't we all have in mind what's best for our own children in our own way? Right. And beyond that, when they're talking education at the Capitol, I'll tell you what some of the reporters have started to notice. When they're looking for people who are in favor of Common Core, everyone they can find to support it is getting a paycheck from someone.
Amen.
And I've had reporters come up and go, okay, we know where you are, but are there any parents on the other side? And you know what? No. I mean, and they may say, oh, I'm a parent, but then you go, oh, but you're connected to SCORE. Oh, I'm a parent. Oh, so you're connected with this group. Oh, you're with the chief. Okay? Everyone who is down there in favor of CORE is getting a paycheck from someone. Those of us who are spending our own time, our own money, our own resources in defense of our own children, we're not getting a dime. We are fighting desperately to save our children and our country. And if we want to talk about what Common Core is, let's take a brief and passing glimpse at the Common Core English exemplars. The language arts, just not fit for me to even touch on here, not fit. The Bluest Eye, Dreaming in Cuban, A Time for Butterflies. A senator in Georgia has testified that they had their chief law enforcement guys look at it, and under normal circumstances, exposing children to this content would result in criminal obscenity charges, but they're not sure what to do because it's on mandatory reading lists for Common Core. What do? Now they'll say, oh, well, no, we're not saying you have to teach this. Well, if you go to the website, there are lessons for teachers on how to teach these books. So if they're teaching teachers how to teach it, you know it's going to be on the test. And by the way, their jobs are dependent on the test scores. So yes, they do have to teach it, no matter what anyone says. I will say this is not about censorship. As long as any of those books continue to sell, you can get them on Amazon, you can get them at a bookstore in your neighborhood. What this is about is mandates. Why does our government feel it has the right to take our tax dollars and force our children to study material that violates our faith, our values, our beliefs, and any right our children have to privacy or innocence? They don't. And despite what you may have read about me and some of the others, we are not in favor of burning books. If for no other reason, because history has taught us where people start out burning books, they end up burning people, and we're opposed to that. However, that said, it's important to remember that the ovens of Auschwitz were not formed in the war rooms of Berlin. They were formed in the lecture halls of Munich. Okay? And we are much closer to Germany 1938 than we may realize. It's important to realize that any time from the Spartans to the Khmer Rouge, from Mao, go through history, any time the government has moved to centralize education and to gain control of a nation's children without fail, it has been followed by disastrous results. And people say, well, okay, maybe, but this is America, there are checks and balances. Let's look at this, let's be reasonable. Okay, fine. We will use a list, and it's not my list, but let's look at what has already happened. Laws began to be passed that made one teachers' union become so powerful that it actually became more and more difficult to get a teaching job without being affiliated or somehow aligned with the union. Non-compliant teachers who would not go along were gradually and on technicalities weeded out. Those who had to keep their jobs were slowly forced into sort of quiet acquiescence. You know, you sit over there and go along and we won't make a big deal. Curriculum was rewritten to coincide with state-approved goals. And by that I mean the federal meaning of state. Teachers who were enthusiastic supporters of reform got promotions, and they got fun new titles like, you're a master teacher now. You're a master teacher, look at you. You get to go and you get to supervise and go to other schools with groups of education executives and essentially spy on your peers to ensure that they are in compliance and that they are going along with what we've determined. Anti-intellectual training began to pop up. The focus was not on facts anymore. That it moved to physical health and lifestyle and diet and moral and character indoctrination. But the new morality was completely devoid of any moral absolutes. There was no right and wrong. It was rather a training of the will versus an education of the mind. Powerful committees with previously unheard of acronyms started to pop up for the establishment of government ideological training to ensure basically that teachers were conforming to the state, and again federal state mandated will. Ed leaders, master teachers began visiting other schools, collecting data on both students and their peers. Ed leaders started to rule both through propaganda and intimidation. Hey, you guys, this is going to be great. We're doing something that's never been done before. Quickly changes to, well, if you want to keep your job, you will do this. Teachers in the room or former ed, who knows countless friends who've told you stories about the intimidation and the brutality that they've endured? I mean, I got calls from teachers this week about something. There are endless data collection by the teacher. There are endless surveys asking schools to report on race, socioeconomic, political background. And in fact, Common Core actually even has a name for this. It's called differentiated recognitions. And they'll talk to you about, well, we de-identify the data. It can't be done. In fact, there was an undergrad student from Georgia who, as part of a project, what he did about this de-identified data is you only need